I mean, basically the willow's normally cut from leaf drop, which is about Christmas, January on. This is all from Somerset, this willow. I've got it. Well, I went over to my daughter, so I brought some back with me, but they've cut a bit later, this one. Luckily it's still green enough to work, otherwise I'd have to soak it. When we do them in the summer, you soak basically a day a foot. So a 7-foot willow you soak 7 days. And the ribs are 7. The twist I'm doing here is only 5 feet. And I'm using a bit thinner one just to start this one. It's a mould I don't normally use, and there's more ribs in this one, and it's wearing my fingers out because it's so tight to get in there. Basically, when you start the plate, you put all the ribs into the plate, into the mould, and you do a little bit of that basket weave that you've got there, and then you start the twist, and that twist will carry on all the way around the pot, as you can see on the other ones, until it's finished. It's one continuous rope of willow, so all the time I can tell from the feel when they're getting a bit thin, and you always add a new stick to each half of the twist at the same time, otherwise they get out of balance. This one now, we're to the stage, we're going to start shaping the pot. So got a peg, wedge there, and then it's simply bring the ribs over roughly to shape. Bring up the string and lash them in place. They're not perfectly right there, but just gives the shape of the pot. So I can adjust them again. I'll have to change the tines later on as I work around. In fact, my plan with these is we're going for a show. I'm not going to probably complete these, I'll leave them partially made. I've got a neck over there that's been just done that one and leaving it just with the neck on the plate. Just gives an idea to people of how they are actually made. And it gives a bit more height to a display with the ribs left sticking up. Usage really, I suppose until the 50s and 60s they were still being used in a small way. Basically when these pots were made, I don't know when they started making them, back in the depths of time I would think, ever since man started playing with willow, he started making basket pots, traps, you name it, as he invented things. The old fishermen that used these was probably still using this, well I know a lot of them were still in sailing boats at the time, so there wasn't even a motor. When it developed that motors were fitted on boats, then the next step they put the old back axle of a car connected to a motor, and that drove a winch standing up towards the bow of the boat, and then instead of having to pull the ropes by hand to haul the pots off the bottom in deep water, they were able to bring them up with the winch, and that was probably the end of the willow pot, because the winch suddenly gave more strength, it gave more power, and that was all good. But when these pots were hooked in the bottom, which is often the case, and as time passed the winches they came to the hydraulic winch, suddenly a winch was lifting 1.5 ton, 2-3 ton pull on the winch. If a pot was hooked, it didn't come up, it just tore to pieces. Whereas with the modern pots made in either plastic or steel and netting, combinations of that, they had the strength to be winched, to be handled, and that way it worked. But otherwise they found they were literally tearing their pots to pieces within weeks really, or months. or even days, and so the willow pup pretty quickly died a death, really. Right, so really the next stage on doing the pot is, once you've made the shape like that, you've got to start putting in extra ribs, because as it gets bigger, obviously, if they just kept getting further apart, the crabs would come straight out through the holes. So you make a gap in the twist. These ribs have all been sharpened. I've sharpened them up ready ahead. And it's always one rib in, one twist of wood, and then I'll just put them out the way for now. Fold them in the back there. Move it all around a little bit. And another twist. Pull that one in. I can feel it getting thin in my hand, so I've been using up these shorter, smaller bits at first, because they're actually a bit easier to handle whilst it's tight around the neck. Put one in, bring it in, and put another rib in here again. It's all adding ribs. The first circle as you come out around this. A couple more twists in. I'm going to undo that bit. Shouldn't be filmed. That bit's no good, it's breaking. These are scraps really, trimmed off the end of the ribs, but they're that bit smaller, and that one there's the worst with this, it's blooming hard on the hands. But you can't really wear gloves because they get stuck in the twist all the time. All the time, basically, you're looking ahead and thinking of the shape. I don't want to put in an extra rib every time, otherwise you end up with a high spot or something on the pot, and if it's wearing on the seabed, in no time that's a weakness that's going to wear through and break the pot. Also, if you're making them for people to look at, you've got to try and make them look nice. When they're on the bottom of the sea, it don't matter what they look like, the crabs don't seem to worry. Just thinking back, I actually learnt to make these from a great uncle of mine, an old chap. He was well on in years when I was a youngster. And one day, I had a little boat at the time, and we were going out fishing, the two of us, and we had a few of these willow pots out. And in fact, the weather had been bad for probably the last 10-14 days, so it'd been like a summer storm. We hadn't been able to get out, it'd been rough. So we went out, and we're rowing out to the bigger boat in the little dinghy, and the old chap's looking over the side of the boat, and he was always a bit of a comedian, a bit of a character really. And after a bit I said to him, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "Arthur lost his watch last time we were out, and he's all looking for it." So I thought, you're not going to see it on the seabed like that. So anyway, we got to the boat and we were out there fishing, and every now and then he's looking over the side and acting a bit silly with it, but anyway, I kept saying, you're not going to find the watch. And we caught a nice catch of fish, like wet fish. And then he said, can we go and do his crab pots? Since we had some fish, we could use the heads and that for bait, so we got a couple of bits ready. And these crab pots were in probably 100 foot of water, around some of the big reefs you see out off the west coast, where the storm had been. Well, it's been everywhere. But, so being the youngster in the boat, it was left to Muggins here to lift the pot, so I had to pull on the ropes. He was just sat in the stern watching. I didn't have a winch on my boat. And was lifting his pots, and as the pot came up alongside the boat, I leaned over to the pot and I did that, and I passed my hand back to him and I said, there's Art's watch, now for goodness sake don't lose it again. And the watch had broken on the pin on the strap. It was hanging on one of the twists of willow like that, with the watch hanging one side and the other half the strap the other side, just dangling into the pot. It must have popped off his wrist as he threw the pot out the last time, and amazingly dropped 100 feet of water. I stayed there in all the storms and the swells for the last fortnight, and we had the watch back. And when I came ashore, as we came ashore, then he didn't stop to help me with anything. He could see his mate's car at the top of the beach and he was going running up the pier like a 2-year-old shouting, I found it, Art, I found the watch. And amazingly they took it to the watch repairer then, and it was within 2 or 3 days it was back in working order. And I've told it to people before and I'm sure they don't believe me, but it did actually happen. It was quite amazing, that. It's another day and it's a bit different weather. Well, we've worked around the twist. I've kept going round and round and round. As you can see, I've practically got as far for the bottom. I don't need the peg in anymore. In fact, I don't need that in anymore. It doesn't normally come off like that, but this one has. Just a few thoughts. Earlier on I mentioned how these pots now aren't used commercially, and some of the reasons why. Just thinking it through, another reason really is when these pots were used, it was often a family boat, as it were. Two brothers or father and son would work a boat together, and at that time still under sail, so no motors for help, so it was either row or use the wind and sail to get places. And in the same way they only used a few pots. Pots were normally put in what they call a truce, a string of pots. There was probably about 7 in a string, 6 or 7, and lifting that in deep water, often 1 or 2 pots would be coming off the bottom, one after the other, and it's more than one man could pull, so partly that's why there was always 2 in a boat. The family, they would probably work 3 strings of pots out in deep water, and a few other pots, just 2 or 3 in the bay around the mooring for other reasons. So they could make a living. They could catch enough crab with their 24, roughly 24 pots. It got that modern fishermen were fishing 100 pots each. Now they're probably fishing 200-300 pots each. To make this sort of pot in those quantities as well for anybody would be, well, rather difficult, I think, for anyone. So I think it's for all these reasons really that this sort of pot has died a death. Probably still caught better for what it was, but we're basically working into the last ring of twist around the pot and getting closer and closer to the earlier twist. which gets a little bit harder on the hands, but then I can run this into nothing, as it were. And then we'll start looking at the heavier wood to put the bottom in it. Well, first of all, I have to give it a haircut, just tidy it all up, so I can't get into it and trim it all when the bottom's there. I'm a bit too big to get through the neck. Just sighting in to take the line of the twists across the pot. You've got to try and imagine the distance where the bottom will end up to where the neck is to get an idea how deep your pot is. That'll do, I think. Let's come round to there. So that doesn't look too bad for a base. Right. I have to admit to using zip ties. One time it was all wire, old wire, often copper wire if you could pinch the old telephone cables from the linesman. But, the zip tie is so useful nowadays. Right, go inside first and just trim off all the little ends and the end of the ribs. Easiest way is just to keep going round, follow the rope around. Got it trimmed up and clean. You can see it suddenly looks a totally different pot when it's been tidied up. Next stage is to put a bottom in it, and the way I've always been taught was I've got some much thicker willow, just making sure it's fairly straight. We put 4 of these across the pot, and it's just a case of positioning them till they look about right. Another one roughly there. I'll reposition these all in a minute, but they're all cut long, and there's a reason for that. If we cut them back all nice and neat right to the edge of the pot, when it's been out in the water for a few days or a few weeks, it's always moving in the sea. There's always a wave action and wear and tear, and the pots wear away around the edges. So what's the 3 or 4 inches of wood sticking out is basically the rubbing strip to otherwise they'd wear at the edge and you'd have a big gap where the crabs would get out the edge of the pot. Right, we've got the ribs in, tied them in place, whether they be tied with wire or cord or whatever, but I've tied them down quick. And then it's literally, you take a couple of ribs initially from that side, pass them in under there, take a couple the other way. Another couple. And then I just do them individually after that. They come in. You've got to get a nice tight solid bottom, because that's the bit that takes all the wear on the seabed, and if it's not strong, your pot's not going to last very long through the season. Right, same on this side as the other side. First few I do them in pairs because it's quicker under the rib. From there you can see the neck, and which just makes me think to mention that different size pots, you have different size necks. The bigger the neck, the bigger the crab, they say. You'll get spider crabs, chanker, the brown crab, And one time a lot of crayfish. Nowadays crayfish are very, very rare, so you don't see many at all. Literally, I think a lot of fishermen are lucky to get one a season, but it might be increasing very slightly. But a nice big open neck is better for crab, but if it's for lobster, etc., lobster tend to get out again with a big neck. So some of the pots are made with a much tighter, deeper neck, and then it will be better for lobster. But other bigger crabs then can't get in. It's just a case of weaving in and out, in and out. We're trying to put them opposing over the wood. So one that way, bringing them in from underneath the twist. In some cases, it tightens the body and holds the whole pot together. Yeah, so neck size controls what you catch to a certain extent. Also, sometimes you make the neck a lot deeper so it's nearer the bottom of the pot. One trick the people used to do was to where are we? They would literally take the back off a spider crab and hang it in the pot where you get one of the V's in the rib. When it's the other way up, obviously they would hook the back leg of the crab there. That would be enough to hold the body in place. They would do that at the start of their day when they were going out fishing. Leave the pot in the bay somewhere by some rocks, and when they come back in the evening, all going well, they would find the pot full of rockfish, or wrasse as a lot of people know them. That's provided them with a fair bit of bait for their start of their day the following day. When these sorts of pots were on the go, freezers and fridges weren't really existing then. So I think the old people in their own way used to do a lot more conservation, because they would catch enough for their orders. They would catch enough to keep everybody happy, but they would leave a lot more fish behind. So there was a lot more fish around, and a lot more to be had every year. So it was their own forms of conservation, really. Nowadays it's quotas, and you see all these fish being thrown back dead because they caught too many, which is such a sad state of affairs, really. I mean, all this in these days were all worked using willow, or tamarisk as well was used a lot. They called it seep over here. That's the furry little green leaf you see along the coast everywhere. It's quite resistant to the salt. It doesn't bend like willow, but it would have been used for the ribs on the pots. Like there, where they've been introduced, the last 2 or 3 ribs going in, you can see where they're widening out. That would have been done in tamarisk because it would give you more strength. Working with the willow, also the old people would have made their fishing basket, the Guernsey basket, the pannier-co. And also, to keep, for example, the rockfish alive overnight, they'd also make couches. The couches, it looks almost like a short torpedo. It's pointed both ends. It's got a trapdoor down one side, and on the older boats there was always a block of wood on the transom with a little hole in it down at the water line, and that was basically to tie the couche to, so when they were sailing out they'd take the fresh bait with them. Nowadays a lot of people still use couches, and they use them for sand eels, to keep sand eels alive in. But the modern boats go so fast that if they drag them in the water behind, they actually kill all the sand eels. So they put them in a bait tank on board. But one time all the couches were behind the boat, and they would just follow in sort of known as the dead water. You get a little slack spot right under the stern of the boat where there's no real movement, and they last longer there like that. That's right. I'm going to turn it round again. It's just always tend to work from both sides and keep something in balance as you do it. Call that one. There's another one. In use, you tie 3 or 4 stones in, probably 1, 2, 3, so they're balancing the part, or even perhaps 4. Basically, when it's thrown in, it lands and the weight takes it down, and it hopefully sits the right way up. If you had all the stones to one side, it could end up on the bottom like that, or upside down, and then the cat can't get in anyway. So it's just a case of balancing it. And bait-wise, they would either use pieces of fish, or limpet was also very popular at one time. Very good for shanker and for the crayfish. And the limpets will all be punched, threaded onto a piece of wire. The wire is passed up, it will come out somewhere like that, and you just hook the wire tight round, and the limpet will be left hanging in the just behind the neck of the pot, so the crab has to go in to go round the back to get to it. Yeah, I mean basically that's number 5. I think you can see the others around on the floor in here. This, I don't normally make as many pots as this. I normally just do them at the Natural Trust night at the Viaer Marchi. But this was an order that's come up from Guernsey Clematis for their stand at Chelsea Flower Show. So hopefully we're going to leave 1 or 2 of them half made so the clematis can climb up and put on a really good display and help Raymond Anderson sell these plants and make another gold medal for him at the show if it all goes well, hopefully. I'm going to have a rest now, give my hands a rest, because I think it's time they had one.
Have you been coming to the Viaer Marchi since it began?
I've missed, I think the first 2 years I wasn't involved, so I've been about 48 years now coming. They gave me a 15 medal.
I got one, thanks.